Alright, today on Fortner Industries we are going from cassette deck to CarPlay. So, a little bit of backstory. I recently acquired a 10th anniversary Miata, and it came standard with a Bose CD player and cassette deck. Now, these were fine back in 1999. But today they are 20 years old, and it shows. I don't need a cassette deck. I'm not from really that era very much, so CD player works. Everything on here works fine, but I would really like to have Bluetooth and CarPlay control. So I picked up this Sony head unit. This is a Sony XAV-AX1000. It came pretty highly reviewed. It's interesting. The reason I liked it the most is it has a volume knob here. Most of the double-din head units in this size range don't have a volume knob. They just have buttons on the bottom. One consequence of having a volume button is a slightly smaller screen, but the Sony makes up for it in it's very, very responsive. So it's a multi-touch screen, and it's just as responsive as you would expect out of a modern iPad or something, which is really nice. Most of these head units are nowhere near as responsive. So combine that with the volume knob, and I think this is a winner. One interesting thing, though, is it's really just a single DIN thick. So the screen is what makes it the double DIN, but it gives me room to work with underneath here if I have to do anything else crazy under the dash. On the back, just the standard kind of I/O that you would expect out of any modern head unit. You've got line level outs if you're going into an amplifier. I am not. Antenna, subwoofer output, reverse camera input, and microphone input, and a remote input if you're using something like steering wheel controls. My car doesn't have it, so that's not a problem for me. The standard connection port for the speakers and power, and then this is an expansion port for plugging in things like HD radio, satellite radio, that kind of thing. I'm also not using that. So here is the wiring harness. I'll cover these extra wires going off here in a little bit, but for now I just want to highlight the basics. So this is the factory interface plug, the standard Scosche plug that you can get for Miata of this type. This plugs directly into the wiring harness that goes to that Bose amplifier. This is the Sony deck. I think a lot of other decks use this plug now. It was new to me, but I haven't done car audio in a while, so but I saw a lot of other head units have this. This here is for the parking brake connection. I still need to do some scouting on the car for that, so I haven't touched it, but I will be putting the connector on here and tying that into the parking brake sensor. I just haven't gotten to that point yet. The Miata only has 4 speakers. It has 2 speakers in each door. There's a tweeter and what they call a sub, but really it's just the standard mid-range door speaker. So it only has front speakers. However, of course, this wiring harness is meant for 4 speakers, and the Crutchfield kit I ordered came with another wiring harness here for the rear speakers. If I ever want to add them, I don't, but if I ever did, at least I have a wiring harness here. I went ahead and connected it all up, tucked it back in there. At least it'll be a plug-and-play solution if someone else wants to do it down the road. But I won't actually need to use this. I just have it set up just in case. And the last thing here is ground wire. So the factory radio has a spade ground right here, and the factory wiring harness just has a connector that goes over the spade. So I just crimped on another spade connector here for the ground, and that plugs right in there to the factory harness. That's the basics of it. Now let's get into what these extra wires are around here and some of what I've done. So the NB Miatas have a power antenna, and this wiring harness does not have a power antenna signal because nobody listens to radio anymore, and no car made within the last 10 years or so has a power antenna anyway. So the need to have that power antenna signal is greatly diminished. That creates a dilemma for me, so that means that the power antenna will always be retracted unless I do something to power it. The easy solution would be to take the blue wire here. Let me isolate that so you can see it a little bit better. Not the blue wire here. This is used for the amplifier output if you have a remote aftermarket amplifier or something like that. This sends a constant 12-volt signal whenever the stereo is turned on. So that gets me most of the way to having the turn-on signal for the power antenna. However, because this is constant whenever the stereo is on, not just if you happen to be listening to the radio, that means that as soon as you turn on the car, turn on the stereo, start listening to CarPlay or whatever, the aerial is going to power up. And it doesn't really need to, especially since I hardly ever listen to the radio. So what some people online had suggested doing was wiring a switch from this trigger power and putting the power signal to the antenna, putting a switch in line with that. So this wire on the factory Mazda side of the harness, this solid blue wire here, goes to that antenna. What I've done here is with this cable that will run into the center console, I have installed a switch. This switch will be hidden in the center console next to the gas cap and the trunk release, and this means I can just flick the switch whenever the stereo is on to raise and lower the antenna. And I tried this out already, just mocked up, and it works great. So the next step will be drill a small hole in the center console to install this switch, and then I have this long length of wire that will run forward back behind the dash where this wiring harness is. So that part is tested and works really well. And to go back and highlight here exactly where what you need to do is in between the amplifier signal and the solid blue antenna on wire here, you need to put a switch, which is what this black and white pair of wires does. Okay, the next challenge that I had to overcome was how to install the backup camera and power that appropriately. So I've noticed on the Miata there's a pretty severe blind spot over the driver's left-hand shoulder, and the Miata is a tiny car. It really doesn't need a reverse camera, but if I could turn on that camera while I was merging and could use the wide-angle view to check my blind spot, that would be really helpful. Now, most reverse cameras are tied into the backup reverse light power, so the white lights that turn on when you shift into reverse. That means that if you're just driving along going forwards, there's no power to those reverse lights, ergo no power to the camera. I need the camera to be on whenever the car is on, so it should really be powered by the ignition. This is the switched 12-volt power here. So that gives me a power source for the camera, but the problem is this harness is in the front of the car and the camera is obviously in the back. So I have another wire here that currently just goes to the spool, since I need to snake this through the car and make sure that I give myself enough cable length. Now you might be wondering why I have 2 wires here, because obviously the camera ground can be in the back of the car, so I don't need to run a ground all the way up here. I can use one of the chassis grounds. It's right next to the battery in the trunk anyway. The other here is for the reverse signal on the Sony harness. So that's what this purple wire is here. And since this wire is just a black and white strand that, or black and white pair that comes together, means that I have the power to the camera itself, and then I will use the black wire as the signal to trigger the reverse camera to automatically turn on when I shift into reverse. So this black wire will go all the way back, and that will tie into the reverse light power. But I will not be powering the camera itself off of that. It's just the turn on signal. All right, here's a little demonstration of the camera working as intended. So I push the button from the home menu. I can turn on the camera there, go back to home, and then here I am struggling to shift into reverse, and it pops up. Now the grid lines turn on when you actually shift into reverse, but when you just turn it on from the menu, the grid lines don't show up. So shift back into neutral, press the button, and it pops up again. So the final piece of this puzzle is to bypass the factory Bose amplifier, and there's quite a few resources online available on how to do this. Some involve cutting the wires and splicing them together. Some involve buying a used amplifier off eBay and reworking that harness to make a jumper. And the last one is the method that I chose here, and that is to use 18 gauge wire and make your own jumpers across the existing connector. That way I don't need to unplug anything else. So I just have this one plug here that is taken out and these little jumper wires. So if you look at this picture and follow the pattern, this will jumper all of the speakers from using the Bose amplifier. After this picture was taken, I wrapped all of this in electrical tape to seal it away. And then the final phase of all of this project is to dress your wiring harnesses and make everything look neat and tidy. So after you have done all of your testing and make sure that all of your connections are good, you don't want to bundle away all of the cables before you've checked all of those things. But once I was all finished, as you can see here, I used some zip ties to clean everything up and keep everything held together neatly. And then I also used Velcro wraps in the center tunnel to clean up that harness and also keep the new cables routed around the shifter so that I don't ever have to worry about those getting caught there. So that's it. I finished the project. Everything works really, really well. I'm very happy with the wiring harness, and I know this will be serving me well for many years to come. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions on how to do stereo installs for NB Miatas, just drop a comment down below and I'll do what I can to help out. Thanks.